Later in the programme, we'll be debating whether religion has become a force for good or evil in the world. But if our agenda is to be the key players on the key issues, then how better to begin than with British Prime Minister Tony Blair. A couple of hours ago, I went over to number 10 Downing Street to interview him, and I began by asking him whether he's minded to join today's new Spanish initiative on Israel and Palestine.
I'm in favour of anything that moves the process forward between Israel and Palestine. I think it's the single most important objective for us in terms of changing the whole atmosphere and climate in the Middle East. And obviously I've been working very hard with our American allies, but also with other Europeans to try and make sure we keep it at the top of the agenda. I think there are possibilities of progress, but we've got to make sure that we do everything that is within our possibility to change the situation there.
Right, but will we join this bid or carry on separately?
I mean, I haven't looked at the details of it, but I think that the key elements are those that, I mean, we've been working on and others have been working on all the way through, and so of course it's good to have everyone on the same page, but it's really about making sure that we make progress towards the two-state solution, that we get in place the right elements that allow us, for example, to get Corporal Shalit released, then get Palestinian prisoners released, that we get a national unity government in Palestine, that we manage to get into a situation where we're negotiating about the details of peace rather than looking at the appalling consequences of conflict.
But whatever the EU can do with the Palestinians and so on, and they obviously can do something, isn't in fact progress, and this target you have for Middle East peace while you're in office, if possible, it all depends on the United States putting wholehearted pressure on Israel.
Well, you're absolutely right in saying the role of the US is crucial, but you see, I think that both the United States and Israel will want to make progress provided we can get a national unity government on the Palestinian side that is in line with the principles laid out by the United Nations, so that there's mutual recognition of an Israeli state and a Palestinian state. And then we've got to clear all the obstacles out of the way and get on with it. And I think the Europeans can play a great part, as you rightly imply, in helping the Palestinian Authority. And then it's for the Americans and ourselves and others, obviously, to work with Israel and trying to make progress.
So you've got to get more pressure from America for a solution.
You've got to get a sense of urgency across the piece, because at the moment what's happening is there's a terrible set of conditions for ordinary Palestinians on the Palestinian side. Israel's still suffering rocket attacks, but you've got a situation where innocent people are losing their lives. There is no progress at the present time, and yet we have an agreement about the solution people want to see, which is a two-state solution. So the thing that I have been urging for many months, and urge again, is to recognise that creating a new Middle East doesn't end with the Israel-Palestine situation, it begins with it.
Do you find that that your perceived sort of procrastination in the war between Israel and the Hezbollah has affected your standing in the Middle East? Because people say, was it right not to condemn Israel's incursions at the beginning? Was it right not to call for a ceasefire straight away? Has that damaged your status in the Arab world? I
think for a lot of people, they couldn't understand why we didn't just say, well, the whole thing had to stop. And I understand that, incidentally. But the reason for that is very simple. You were never going to get a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon unless it was one on both sides, and unless you had then the possibility of an international force coming into the south of Lebanon. But I think what is important is not just for Israel-Palestine, but also in respect of relationships between Israel and Lebanon, is resolve the outstanding issues so that the Lebanese government, the proper democratically elected government in Lebanon, is in full charge of the Lebanon. Because otherwise what we face in the region is a situation where the extremists always have the upper hand. So the most militant elements of Hamas have the upper hand in Palestine, the most militant elements of Hezbollah have the upper hand in Lebanon, these Al-Qaeda-backed extremists or Iranian-backed Shia militia in Iraq have the upper hand. You've got to make sure all the way through that we are, you know, as I put it, driving forward with a strategy for the whole of the Middle East that is about helping and empowering and supporting the moderate elements against the extreme elements. In terms of Iraq, Prime Minister,
in the light of the latest figures, not just the lawlessness and so on, but the latest figures from the Iraqi health ministry, that the number of Iraqis who died is between 100,000 and 150,000 and so on. With those scale of figures, if you had known that that was the scale of bloodshed, would you have still gone to war?
Well, the alternative was leaving Saddam in charge of Iraq, where hundreds of thousands of people died. There were 1 million casualties in the Iran-Iraq war. Kuwait was invaded, and 4 million people went into exile. So the idea that Iraqis should be faced with a situation where they either have a brutal dictator in Saddam or alternatively a sectarian religious conflict, why can't they have in Iraq what their people want, which is a non-sectarian government, a government that is elected by the people, and the same opportunities and the same rights that we enjoy in countries such as this?
But so far it's been, pretty much of a disaster.
It has, but you see, what I say to people is, why is it difficult in Iraq? It's not difficult because of some accident in planning. It's difficult because there is a deliberate strategy, Al-Qaeda with Sunni insurgents on the one hand, Iranian-backed elements with Shia militia on the other, to create a situation in which the will of the majority of Iraqis, which is for peace, is displaced by the will of the minority for war.
But you said you would still have gone to war. But I mean, what would you have, knowing what you know now, what would you and should you both have done differently?
Well, I think you can debate that forever, but then there are issues that I've already raised to do with, was the de-Baathification process too fast? Should we have disbanded the army in the way that we did, and so on? But in the end, what we've got to understand, and this is why it's so important for us to send a message to the region, we are not walking away from Iraq. We will stay for as long as the government needs us to stay. So and the reason for that, let me just finish. The reason for that is that what is happening in Iraq, as in Afghanistan, as in elsewhere in parts of the Middle East, is a struggle between the decent majority of people who want to live in peace together and those who have an extreme and perverted and warped view of Islam who want to create war. And in those circumstances, our task has got to be to stand up for the moderates and the Democrats against the extremists and the sectarians. And they are testing our will at the moment. And our will has not to be found wanting. I mean, of course it's difficult. It's very difficult. But it's difficult not because people in Iraq want this bloodshed and this attempt to provoke civil war, but because this is being driven by outside elements that are the very outside elements fueling extremism everywhere. Now, the reason why Israel-Palestine is important and the situation in Lebanon is important is that I don't think we will succeed in Iraq unless we succeed across the region, unless we have a strategy that embraces the whole of the Middle East.
That's going to take a hell of a long time.
It will take time, but that's why we've got to look. The reason we are there, the reason this whole struggle came about was because there were a combination of elements that came out of the Middle East that ended up with the Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan, that ended up finally with 9/11, that ended up with Madrid and London, as well as all the disruption and the terrorism all over the Middle East. And in the end, the answer to it is to recognize the roots of this are deep. It's a generational struggle. But if we walk away from it now, we will only have to confront it again later.